Welcome back to Low Stress Math with Mrs. Bono. We are in Book 3, Chapter 7, Pythagorean Theorem, Lesson 3, Finding the Length of the Hypotenuse. So let's start with, what's a hypotenuse? Well, on the day before, we talked about it being the longest side of a right triangle. Be very careful. This only works for right triangles. So it is the longest side of a right triangle. And yeah, I did write all in caps. I am yelling at you. Right triangles only. So, finding the length of the hypotenuse, we're going to round to the nearest tenth if necessary. We'll get back to that in a bit. Now, over here, we're going to label the sides. It doesn't really matter about A and B. I like A to be the altitude, so A is 4, and B to be the bottom or the base. It makes sense in my head, it's okay. And C is the longest side, the hypotenuse. So find the hypotenuse, it's right there, it's C. Now we have to find the length. All right, now let's get back to this round to the nearest tenth. Sometimes you're gonna get an answer that has a radical sign in it. Remember, the radical sign is the square root sign. So what to do? First, press the double arrow key. The key that has 2 arrows on it above the enter. Okay, to change from a radical and that's that thing that looks like a check mark, to a decimal number. So let's say you have the square root of 2. You press that check mark to find it. So here, let's look again. To find the square root of a number, you press the second key and then the x squared button. Let's say it's the square root of 2. I press enter and it comes back with that radical sign still in it. Then I press this double arrow key, boop, and look, now I got 1.414, blah, 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 and I would round that to the nearest tenth, 1.4. We'll get back, we'll do more of this. All right, identify the side that's missing. All right, sorry, write down the Pythagorean theorem. This is traditional, but if we're looking for the hypotenuse, and the hypotenuse is C, that's an equal sign. I can flip it around to have C squared equals A squared plus B squared. And it's still gonna work, it's still the same thing, but now I just have my variable on the left. Come back and look at this. A is 4, so where the A was, 4, and B is 3, so where the B is 3. So C squared is gonna equal 4 squared plus, excuse me, oh, silly allergies, 3 squared. If I was a better editor, I would take that part out of the video, but I'm not, so you'll just have to suffer with me sneezing. So 4 squared is 4 times 4 is 16, so I'm going to calculate the squares. C squared equals 16 plus 3 times 3, 9. Okay, next step, simplify. By simplify, they mean add the two numbers together. 16 plus 9, C squared equals 25. But I don't want C squared, I just want C. So to get rid of the square, I have to find the square root of both sides. What are you talking about, Bono? Well, C squared, if you square root it, is C. 25, if you square root it, is 5. So C equals 5. Label accordingly. Well, I don't actually have a label on here, so my answer is just C equals 5. But if I do have a label, it's going to be something like millimeters, or centimeters, or meters, or maybe miles or feet or inches. It could be any length, we don't know. But you do kind of have to be careful because remember, this is starting out pretty easy, but sometimes it sneaks up on you. So let's say I have a right triangle. And on my right triangle, I have C, which is missing. Here's my right angle. And this says 3 feet. And this says, 15 inches. But those units are different. So what I need to do is go back and say, all right, 12 inches in a foot, 3 feet times 12 is 36 inches. Now both of those are inches and I can do the problem. So here's a sample how to do the problem, all the steps you need to do. C squared equals A squared plus B squared. C squared equals, remember I like to use the altitude, so I'm going to use 36 squared plus 15 squared. And now I need my calculator because let's be honest, none of us know what 36 squared is off the top of our heads. So 36, and this button up here next to the 7, that's the square. So 36 squared is 1,296. Wow, that's a big number. C squared equals 1,296 plus 15 squared. I'll come back and I'm going to do 15 squared on my calculator. I knew that one was 225, but you know, you don't have to memorize this. We have a calculator. So let's add those two together. So 225 plus 1296 is 1521. So C squared equals 1,521. Okay, now I'm going to square root both sides. How to square root? Use the second and the x squared button, and now you'll see the radical sign is flashing. And I put 1,521 in there. Boom, 39. Okay? So C equals 39. And if I just wrote that, I would get 4 out of 5 points because I did not label. Now, which label am I going to use? I'm going to use feet or inches. Well, I changed the feet to inches, so now I'm going to use inches in my answer because that's the unit I used. Always be careful. Okay, your turn. Stop the video and do these 6 problems. The problems, this should have a 10 feet on the bottom. So number 7 has 10 feet on the bottom, and this 48 inches is floating up in Netherlands, so I'm just going to move it down. 48, oh no, not 4. And that'll work better. Okay, pause the video and try the problems. I'll be right back with you. Okay, I think you should have done the problems. And now you're just going to check your work while I go over it. First things first, always write down the formula. If you're using a formula, you have to write it down. So, C squared equals A squared plus B squared. C is the hypotenuse. A and B are interchangeable. So C squared equals 8 squared plus 6 squared. C squared equals 64 plus 36. C squared equals 100, because you have to add them. And square root both sides, to get C equals 10. And this is when I look back at my problem and say, oh wait, they didn't give me a unit. So I don't have to worry about it, C equals 10. Okay, the next one. C squared equals, again, I like the altitude to be A and the base to be B, and C is the missing side. C squared equals A squared plus B squared. So C squared equals 18 squared plus 80 squared. C squared equals 324 plus 6,400. Add those together. C squared is 6,724. Go back, I have to square root both sides. Square root of c squared is c, and the square root of 6,724 is 82. No unit, so I can put a box around it. Okay, coming down here a little. A squared, sorry, A is 21. It doesn't matter. B is 72. If you did it the opposite, that's fine. And that can be C. C squared equals A squared plus B squared. C squared equals 21 squared plus 72 squared. C squared equals 441 plus 5,184, which is a little excessive. C squared equals 5,625. Square root both sides. And C equals 75. Is there a unit? No. Here we go. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. A and B don't matter, so, wait, I wrote it backwards. Oh, it's all right, we'll live. 48 squared plus 55 squared equals C squared. 3,025 plus wait, that can't be right. I couldn't have done that right. I must have them backwards. Did I do them backwards? 55 squared is 3,025. I did do them backwards. Bono, bono, bono. Look at me all being happy. 2,304 plus 3,025 equals C squared. What am I doing here? Adding. 5,329 equals C squared. Square root both sides, and C equals 73. I have to go back and look. There are inches in this problem, so that is 73 inches. Put a box around it, because you're done. Now let's try the next one. Do I have room? Yeah. C squared equals A squared plus B squared. A, B, whichever, doesn't matter. C squared equals 5 squared plus 9 squared. C squared equals 25 plus 81. C squared equals 106. And I square root that, and I want to show it to you because this is the one that I was talking about where you have to round. So here we go. Second square root 106 equals, up, it came back to the same 106. I pressed the double arrow keys, and look, it gave me 10 point blah, 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 blah. So C is equal to 10.29563.014 dot, 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 because it keeps going. I'm going to round to the nearest tenth. And C equals, well, it's not equal to, it's approximately equal to 10.3. There is no unit, so that's the answer. Remember, 2 rounds up because of the 9. If this was a 4, it would stay a 2. Wait, rounding is not what I'm teaching, though. So let's come over to here. A squared plus B squared equals, let's just write it in the right order. C squared equals A squared plus B squared. 10 can be the base. 24 can be the altitude. So C squared equals 24 squared plus 10 squared. C squared equals 576 plus 100. C squared equals 675. Square root both sides. And C equals 26. Come back here. There are feet units, so I have to put feet in my answer. Do not be defeated. Make sure you write that down. All right, on the bottom, I'm just going to go over briefly how to make the computer square root for you. Number 1, press the green second button. It looks like a green button with a 2 and an ND in it. That's the green second button. It's all the way up on the left. 2. Press the X squared, which just looks like X squared. 3. Enter your number. And 4, press enter. You may have to press the double arrow key or not. So you might need to press that double arrow key to get a decimal. But good luck. I'll talk to you soon.